The end of 2023 is here. We're ringing in the new year here on the Beneverse Movie Channel. And what better way to ring in the new year than by looking back at the last year, 2023, and talking about movies. And I believe in doing a best of the year list, and I also believe in doing the worst of the year list. However, I do want to say real quick before I get into my worst of the year list, which I'll be selecting 10 titles. While I do believe in the exercise of making a worst of list at the end of the year, I don't want to be mean-spirited in these episodes. So while I do talk about them, and while I will be talking about them negatively, I want to just kind of give that warning that I do take this seriously. I'm not going to be so aggressively mean towards a movie. Rather, I'm going to look at the film. I'm going to examine what doesn't work and why I find it so unsuccessful, and also what it says about filmmaking now, and especially on the studio side, because a lot of these films are really fundamentally issues within the studio system as Hollywood exists. So with that said, let's get into my top 10 worst films of 2023. Kicking off this list, and boy, am I getting ready for how much trouble I'm going to get for having this movie at my number 10 spot, because I know it is some people's just one of their favorite films of the year, one of their favorite comedies of the year, just the movie that has defined their persona for like, it feels like 6 months now. But after watching it, I found it to just be a hodgepodge of tonal inconsistencies. It was a movie that I found severely unfunny. It felt so try hard at all of its jokes, and it just did not land for me in any way. And that is Bottoms, starring Rachel Sennott. And Rachel Sennott is an actress that I like. This movie just never landed for me. I found the humor to be obnoxious. I found the lack of tone to just be jarring. It was a movie that was trying to basically be Heathers and also be an homage to 70s and 80s sex comedies, while it also is trying to be kind of a modern reinvention, a feminist story, an LGBTQ story. It's trying to be all of these things at once, and I just don't think it is successful at any point. It is also a movie that I just don't fully understand what they were going for some of the jokes. It's has times where it feels like this movie could have been far more mean-spirited and maybe would have worked to the benefit, but then they pull back and they go super sincere with the story. It's just a jarring movie that I didn't appreciate watching, and it just, like I said, I can forgive a lot of those mistakes, but I found none of the humor funny. Coming in at my number 9, you know what? Maybe I should have given this film a little bit more credit, because while watching it, I didn't have a really terrible time, but I think it's because I kept thinking it was going to lead up to something. When I heard the premise of this movie as it was coming out in the spring of 2023, I heard that it had this A-list star that was taking the sci-fi approach. It just felt all completely right. It had Sam Raimi producing the film, and it had one of my favorite stars in Adam Driver, and thus mix that with dinosaurs, and I thought 65 was going to be a really fun, enjoyable movie. And instead, what I got was a movie that's just so ultimately forgettable. It has no real emotion to it. Adam Driver is good in the movie, but everything else doesn't work towards anything. I don't think the special effects are anything to brag about. The story is completely forgettable to the point that I don't even really remember what the movie is about. And for a movie that is about, Adam Driver fighting dinosaurs, it really didn't give me enough dinosaur action for me to think this is a fun, silly movie, kind of in the vein of some of the newer Jurassic World movies. And it didn't elevate itself for me to be like, oh, this is a really scary Sam Raimi level horror film. It could have been a horror film with dinosaurs, or it could have been a really fun sci-fi romp, but ultimately it's a really bland, forgettable movie that cost a lot of money. And the reason I bring up the budget to this movie is because I think this is going to be another example of studios looking at a movie failing at the box office, and they're going to be like, oh, we need to stop making this movie. We cannot keep greenlighting original stories. And in reality, it's not that you can't keep greenlighting original stories. It's that audiences are understanding what makes a bad movie and when a film feels lazy. And that's what 65 is. And coming in at number 8, anyone who's followed this channel knows that I have not been a big fan of this movie. And I should just say right now, there is another entry within the DC universe that came out this year in Shazam! Fury of the Gods that I think is technically a worse movie. I had less enjoyment watching that movie. However, the reason that this movie makes it in instead of Shazam! Fury of the Gods is simply because while I did not enjoy Shazam! Fury of the Gods, I didn't find it particularly offensive. This movie, while it has aspects that are done better, it has such fundamental issues, and the resurrecting of dead actors, and just with everything going on with this film, with its star, I watched this movie and I tried ignoring all of it and I couldn't, because this movie is just laughably bad. And that's The Flash. One, this movie looks horrible. Two, it's a movie that focuses solely on Ezra Miller's character of Barry Allen. And yet I feel like I didn't know who the character of Barry Allen was. It leads to this emotional moment with Barry and his mother. And it's a movie that's so not interested in Barry that when that moment comes, you just kind of forget about it. It has Michael Keaton return, and that's one of the better moments of this movie when we get Michael Keaton returning as Batman. But again, it's just so only interested in being like, well, audiences are now going to be invested because it's Michael Keaton as Batman. And while Michael Keaton gives a good performance, it's not enough to salvage this movie that is just ugly to watch. That's humor is just completely misguided. From storytelling to visual language, I found The Flash to be pretty dreadful. And I found the cameo galore and focusing in on that aspect of the movie and really advertising the movie heavily on that even far more despicable. Coming in at number 7, and I am going to upset the TikTok audience. So who am I not upsetting today, I guess is the real question. But I had heard so much positive about this movie when it first premiered. I knew it went viral on TikTok. There was just so much. There was the whole dance crave about it. And I was looking forward to this Blumhouse film, this kind of silly new franchise with a killer doll. It kind of felt like it was Chucky. And then I saw the product that people were raving about in Megan. And I have to be honest, I thought this movie was bad. I just didn't understand why anyone was invested in this movie. There's some fun, I guess, to be had. Like, to me, the only fun to be had is like the TikTok dance of this, where, you know, she's dancing. Like, there are beats of this movie that I guess are like a little scary, but it was so easily predictable. It was a movie that I felt held back on all of its violence and horror aspects. It was just really a movie that I'd seen hundreds of times and I thought had done it so much better. And when you had this like really clever trailer that had this really unique energy and comedic tone to it, and I see the movie and that's completely stripped within the movie, I was just left with something that felt really horror light. And horror light isn't a bad thing, but it wasn't anything to rave home about. And watching this movie, I was just like, this is so unclever at every beat that I'm not enjoying sitting here watching it. Coming in at number 6, I always feel like I have one of these movies each year on my list. And this one hurts that I have to have it on this list because I am such a fan of the Disney original film of this. This animated film is one of my favorite ones. It's actually back here somewhere. I just love this story. And when I heard that this director who had just done The Green Knight was going to be doing this source material, and then I had started hearing some initial reactions to this movie where it's like, oh, this movie's actually like kind of fun and Jude Law is cooking it up. And I was just like, okay, maybe Peter Pan and Wendy isn't going to be that bad. And when I watch this movie, it's been the same issues that I've been having for 5 years. It takes the spirit and joy and really the soul of the animated 1950s Peter Pan and just completely strips it for something that's so grayed out, that looks so bad, and just has none of the real emotion associated with Peter Pan. Thus, when watching Peter Pan and Wendy, I kept having the thought, and it was an intrusive thought, but it was just like, why is this movie so long? And 2, why am I not just watching the 1950s Peter Pan? Because my time would be so much better spent. Coming in at number 5, when I saw this movie earlier in December, I thought it was really bad, but I didn't actually realize how much I had hated the experience of watching this movie. And I don't know why. I don't know why this movie bothered me as much as it does, because I've seen mean-spirited action films. I've seen gritty action films. I've seen movies that basically have the exact same premise as Silent Night. And yet this movie rubbed me completely the wrong way. And I think I've identified it, and I believe I talked about it a little bit on this channel when I reviewed Silent Night, but it's the aspect of this child murder that happens that is the inspiring event for everything that happens in Silent Night. And the visceral nature of it, the repeated viewing of watching this child get gunned down, that one, I just didn't enjoy that. And two, this movie, it lacked any sort of fun. And I get that this movie doesn't need to be fun. I get that mean-spirited action has its place, but I was so bummed out watching this movie because, again, it's just repeated death of the kid, just cutting back to it. This character played by Joel Kinnaman just struggling with that. The PTSD that goes into losing a son and the destruction that violence then has on this family, that I couldn't detach and watch this movie for what it was. And what I was watching was this movie that I didn't want to spend time in this world. And when it finally ended, I was just so glad to be rid of it. Coming in at my number 4. So let's see. I've already pissed off the DCU fans. I've already pissed off the Rachel Sennott fans. I've pissed off the TikTok generation. And you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm just going to have to piss off the Snyder fans right now, because Rebel Moon is not a good movie. And this has, again, some of the weird things going on in Hollywood right now. And I think the big one for me, that while watching this movie, was this is clearly not the movie that was intended to be released. And I don't understand why. This didn't have to do the theatrical play that all of the other Zack Snyder films did. Like, this didn't have to be a PG-13 rating. But when I'm watching this movie, I can, one, feel that it's completely incomplete. Two, it's a director not getting notes on his material anymore. And I know who Snyder is, and I've always defended Snyder as a filmmaker. But while watching this movie, what was frustrating me about it was watching it and then being like, okay, not only is this not a particularly good Snyder film, but they've been having this huge press circus with Snyder going out and Netflix kind of hinting at it, that this isn't even really the movie. Like, there's this longer R-rated cut, and that changes the fundamental understanding of his movie. And like, that's actually the movie that like he had set out to make, that's the gritty Star Wars. And thus I'm watching this movie, and it's like 2.5 hours. And all I'm thinking is, then why am I watching this movie? Like, why am I not watching this movie that apparently you and Netflix had agreed to make? Why can't we just make the movie right on the first time? It felt very much of, again, a studio in Netflix trying to buy some hype and get some buy-in with the Snyder fans and release this like campaign of just being like, well, release the Snyder cut of Rebel Moon. And it just all felt so fake. It felt so promotional, and I was really turned off by it. And the movie does nothing to grab me. It's a really dull story. The actors are all particularly uninteresting in this movie, and it really just doesn't have an original thought within it. Well, I think I've gotten through the controversy at this point, because I don't think anyone is going to be defending my top 3. This was a really easy top 3, because there were 3 movies that I saw this year that I just thought were just far and above the worst films that I saw. And let's just start with the one that I will at least give credit to the director, Larry Charles, for at least adding aspects of creativity in this movie. Dix the Musical, I did not like, but I will admit it takes a huge swing. It is all risk. It is all comedy that is going to be divisive. And it is also the sense of it is a cult comedy, in the feeling that some people are going to love this and some people are going to defend this movie and be on its wavelength. I was completely not on its wavelength, and it felt like a film that was trying too hard. All the jokes just felt aggressive. It felt so in my face annoying. It really felt like someone taking their fingernails and just dragging it across a chalkboard. And it just felt so try hard, and in a way that I had no appreciation or patience for. Coming in at number 2, and this movie's bad, and honestly, it probably could be deserving of the #1 spot. It's just how much I dislike the #1 spot. But Heart of Stone starring Gal Gadot, get out of here. Like, what was this movie? This is another example of Netflix just making a movie that doesn't exist. This has no cultural awareness. No one saw this movie. Gal Gadot is not good in this film. This is a script that was written by AI. There is no originality to this movie, nor did this film ever try to have originality. There is no direction style to it. There is no action. There's no tension. There's nothing in this movie that has any form of life. It is a movie without a soul. And you're just watching and you're like, oh my God, this film is so hollow and so unimaginative. And I just wish that this money that was used to make Heart of Stone actually went to directors with an idea or actors with passion. And I just felt it. I was just like, this is lazy. And it also does that excuse of, and it drives me crazy when movies do this. If you're going to be this aggressively uninteresting, don't make your film like 2 hours. Why can't you make films like 80, 90 minutes anymore? Just to like end the pain. And this film prolonged the pain in a completely unflattering light. And coming into my #1 spot, there was no movie beating this. I knew from the exact second I watched this movie back in like the summer of 2023 that when I saw this movie, this was going to be the #1. I knew it. I knew the exact second that I watched it on Hulu and was like, okay, this is a remake of a great movie starring a rapper that I don't like and is obviously trying to riff on that humor and modernize it, but without having Wesley Snipes or Woody Harrelson. You know, the aspects that made White Men Can't Jump, White Men Can't Jump. And now we're rebooting it with Jack Harlow? What were we thinking here? This movie is a disaster. And again, what angered me so much about this movie is, one, there's no style of this. There is no understanding of what makes the original interesting and fun and why it engaged audiences, because that's evidenced by having Jack Harlow in this movie, who cannot act. White Men Can't Jump. Well, guess what? White men can't act in the case of Jack Harlow. This was such an aggressively bad movie. And I just didn't understand the exercise of making this movie, because if you wanted to make a hustling basketball movie, just make your own movie. You don't have to borrow everything that White Men Can't Jump did so well. They try to add some dramatic beats in this movie. It works to zero effect. It is a movie that has comedy in it, but you wouldn't know based on the performance of this movie, because there is not a laugh line in this. There is nothing memorable about White Men Can't Jump. And I found it so frustrating to sit there and watch a movie that I love and a sport that I love just get this type of treatment. And it felt so cynical. I'm sorry, if you do want to reuse the White Men Can't Jump premise, I don't love it, but there is ways to use it and to have this character dynamic between these two characters. And really all you had to do was put 2 charismatic stars in it and just let them kind of have a back and forth. But Hulu didn't even understand that. Hulu didn't understand that basic fundamental aspect of chemistry needed to make White Men Can't Jump enjoyable. Not even good, just like enjoyable. And that's why White Men Can't Jump is my worst film of 2023. Did you agree with my list? I know you didn't. I know you're sounding off in the comments. I don't care. This is my list. This is what I believe in, and I endorse it wholeheartedly. Thank you all for an incredible 2023. I cannot believe the amount of success I've had in this year, and it's all because of you. So guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and thank you for kicking off 2024 with me. We'll be back on Tuesday, January 2nd, talking about the best films of 2023, which I have 10 titles for. So get excited for that.